Excellent. Well, if you haven't been with us right now, we are in the end stages of our conversation starting point. For the last 6 weeks, we've been walking through this. If you weren't here for those weeks, I want to encourage you to go back and to watch or listen. I want to welcome those of you who are joining us online. Encourage you to do the same if you weren't with us for the last 6 weeks. And the great thing is now, as we get to the 6-week point, you can actually binge watch starting point. And I encourage you to do that, to walk through all that we've walked through as we've been looking at, okay, how do we establish a starting point for our faith? And for some of us, that's a restart. For some of us, it's reinforcing our faith and maybe putting some pieces in place that were missing as we engaged life with the faith that we had been handed. Because for many of us, we believed what we believed growing up because that's what our parents told us to do. And our parents said, well, this is what we believe. And so we believed it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I do the same thing with my kids. It's not like I have a book of world religions at home and I open it up and said, hey, kids, choose one. No, I said, okay, this is what we believe and this is why we believe it. And for many of us, we were told that, but we didn't really investigate it. We didn't really do a lot to build the foundation of it. So then we got to college and we encountered that professor. And he started to raise all these questions and tell us things that we never heard before. And he was smart. We knew that he was smart because he had patches on his suit jacket. And you have to be smart to put patches on the elbows of your suit jacket. Why else would you ever do that? And all of a sudden we started to wrestle through, I don't know what it is that I actually believe. And so what we're doing now is we're looking at, okay, how do we go back and reinforce that? How do we go back? If we're going to start over, what does that look like? What is this whole journey of faith thing all about? And as I said, for the past 6 weeks, we've been working through that and tackling different pieces of that. But before we end, there's one thing that we have to talk about. Because if we're going to talk about faith and we're going to talk about our faith journey and believing, then we have to actually talk about belief itself, and the reality of belief. And what we're about to walk through, some of you have processed before. As a matter of fact, what we're about to walk through, for some of you, it's why you actually left faith. For some of you, you've thought about it a little bit, but you didn't want to think about it anymore. And for some of you, it's kind of lurking there in the background, but you've never really gone down that road. And so what I want to do is I want to talk about belief itself. Now, belief is, I believe, one of the most powerful and one of the most amazing things that God has given us. The ability to believe is the most powerful force at humankind's disposal. I don't know if you ever thought about this as it pertains to you as a human being, as it pertains to us as humankind, but one of the things that we can do that it doesn't seem that all of creation can do, except for us, is the ability to imagine and the ability to believe. So you can actually imagine things that aren't reality. And you have the ability not only to imagine those things, but then to believe that those things could become a reality. And here's the thing, you have the ability to actually bring those things into reality. And all of history is a story of individuals who believed something. They imagined something could be, they believed it should be, and they brought it into reality. It doesn't seem that our pets have the ability to do that. I don't think your dog's sitting at home thinking, you know what, I could really see myself in a bigger apartment. I don't think that's happening. It doesn't seem that they have the ability to have a vision and actually create. But we do. And God's given us this incredible ability. And everything that has been done, as you look back through history, everything that has been done, good or bad, was done because somebody believed it could or should be. Someone said, no, it shouldn't be like this. It should be like that. And so they did something about it. But it started with them believing. It's phenomenally powerful. Every problem that has been solved was solved because somebody believed it could or should be solved. Some of us have heard that statement that Jesus made, where Jesus says that mountains, if you just had a little bit of faith, you could actually say to this mountain, move, and it would move. Mountains could be moved because of belief or faith. And for many of us, we get really weird about this statement, and what does Jesus mean? And well, we got to believe harder, and we got to believe more. But the reality is, if you look at history, mountains have been moved because someone believed. Medical mountains have been moved. Education mountains have been moved. Racial mountains have been moved because someone believed. And there was a group of people. When you look at the civil rights movement, it wasn't just about a dream. It was about a group of people who believed, along with Martin Luther King Jr., that it should be different and that it could be different. And because they believed, the world changed. And there are diseases that at one time took out huge segments of the population that literally do not exist anymore. Why? Because someone believed that they could be eradicated. Even if you look back over the last 10 to 15 years, and you look at what's happened with malaria in Africa, what we've been able to do is unbelievable. Why? Because someone believed that it could change. It all started with someone believing something. And there are a lot of examples of this as it pertains to the good, but there are also examples of this as it pertains to the bad. If you look back and you look at the story of World War II, it all started with an individual named Hitler who believed something, and he literally changed the world with talking. And he stood up and he communicated a vision for the nation of Germany and what he thought should be and what he thought could be, and all of a sudden people began to believe. And the world was never the same again. All because of belief. It's unbelievably powerful what can happen when you believe. And belief, it gives us the ability to try, but not just to try once, to try and try and try again and again and again, and to anticipate and to hope and to innovate and create. It gives us the ability to be able to change the world around us. And I think it's one of the greatest gifts that God has given us, specifically to us as human beings. But there are several things that we know about belief. And one of those is this. When you believe something is possible, you look for a way until you find a way. When you believe something is possible, you look for a way until you find a way. As a matter of fact, one of the things that's interesting, I heard someone talk about this the other day, and they were talking about how at tech companies, one of the things that oftentimes they'll do to initiate individuals as they come on the team is that they'll give them an unsolvable problem. And you've probably heard about this before in different spaces, and so someone tells you to go out and get the blinker fluid for the car, and you spend all that time at the auto store trying to find the blinker fluid until the guy finally asks you what you're looking for, and you say blinker fluid, and he said, someone is being very mean to you. Because there is no such thing. And oftentimes at tech companies, what they'll do is they'll bring someone in and say, okay, here's this unsolvable problem, just to be able to kind of give them a hard time as they're getting started. But one of the really interesting things is that sometimes they actually solve it. And they'll come back in and say, well, I figured out the problem. And the rest of the team will look at them and say, no, you don't understand. It's an unsolvable problem. No, you just thought it was unsolvable, so you gave up. But no one told me that it was unsolvable, and so I was actually able to do it. It's incredible, the power of belief. I don't know if you know this or not, but study after study after study after study after study shows that optimistic individuals consistently outsell their smarter, less optimistic coworkers. If you're hiring someone to be a salesman, don't hire the person who's smarter, hire the person who believes more. As a matter of fact, with my staff here at Hoboken Grace, one of the things that I ask for everyone to do as they apply is to be able to take a Strengths Finder quiz. And it kind of works through what their natural strengths are. And as part of that, one of the things that I'm always looking for is belief. And you say, oh, that's because you're religious. No, it's because I want to actually impact the world with what it is that we're doing. And that strength isn't actually a religious thing. It's their ability to be able to believe in what is not that it actually could be. And individuals who have the strength of belief can do unbelievable things because they have sometimes this irrational belief that things should, can, and will change. So some of you have experienced this where, and some of you are very smart. I mean, you're phenomenally smart. Like sometimes I'll talk to some of you and I just tell myself through the whole conversation, pretend like you know what they're talking about. And you're phenomenally smart, and you went to a college that most of us couldn't get into, and you tell us every time that we talk to you what college it is that you went to, but you're phenomenally smart, and you've done really, really well for yourself, and you've got a nice place, and you've got a nice car, and you're like, you know what, I made it. But then occasionally, you'll bump into that individual who started their own company, and you'll think to yourself, how in the world did they do that? And you're thinking, they could never get into the college that I went to because, well, we know what college you went to. And they're never, but the reality is that you have a nice car and they have a nice jet. And you can't say this out loud, but you interact with them and you walk away and you're thinking, I don't know how they did that. They're not very smart. And if you were honest with yourself, and if you were to look at the business that they started, if you were to have thought about starting it, you're smart enough to have talked yourself out of it. But they weren't smart enough to talk themselves out of it. They were just dumb enough to believe that it was possible. And they did it. It's unbelievable what you can accomplish when you believe that something's possible. Because when you believe something, and there's several things that we know about belief. When you believe something, you look for a way until you find a way. It's one of the things that we know about belief. One of the other things that we know about belief is that when you believe something, we constantly look for evidence to support what we believe to be true. So I believe that this can change. I believe that this should change. So we constantly look for and we constantly see evidence that supports what it is that we believe. And sometimes this allows us to be able to do really great things. Sometimes this leads us down very interesting roads. But the reality is, we know about belief, not only that you're going to look for a way until you find a way, but if you believe something, you also constantly look for evidence to support what you believe. This is especially true. I mean, I think we'd all agree on this. I think this is especially true for Republicans and Democrats and independents. Some of you got very nervous right there. You're like, he's going to blow this place up. This is going to get ugly. No, it's true about all of us. It's true about all of us. When you believe something, you're constantly looking for evidence of it. It's what allows us to be able to do great things when we believe. But it also can lead down some really interesting roads, can it? Because oftentimes, not only do we look for evidence to support what we believe, but we also block out evidence that doesn't support what we believe. And so inside of this household, we don't watch that channel. Man, you guys are really uptight about the political thing, aren't you? But we do. We do this, and we know this is how belief works. And we look for evidence that supports what it is that we believe. And just as an aside, really, really quickly, for those of you who are in relationships, Well, you need to understand the significance of this inside of a relationship, because couples that believe the best see the best. Listen. Couples that believe the best see the best. And if you believe the best about your spouse, it will actually change what it is that you see. As a matter of fact, some of you are here today and you have great relationships, but in about 20 minutes, I could plant some seeds that all of a sudden you'd walk out of here and you say, I don't know if that's true. Well, look at that. That is true. And you'll start to see evidence to what it is that you believe. And if you're looking at, okay, well, how can I really impact my relationship? Pay attention to what it is that you believe about the other person and just see if it doesn't impact what it is that you see in the person. And what stands out and what it is that gets your attention. Why? Because when we believe something, we constantly look for evidence of what it is that we believe. Another thing that we know about belief is that belief is easy to maintain inside of a community of shared belief. So belief becomes more powerful when it actually takes place inside of a community, because inside of a community of people who believe the same thing, well then, as we talked about with Hitler, it's unbelievable the power of a community that believes something, and it's constantly reinforcing that with one another. Because if you struggle with what it is that you believe, all of a sudden there are individuals who can come alongside of you, and you come in and you say, well, I don't know, I'm really struggling with this, and what about this? And there's 12 other people who say, no. And they point out all the different ways that that's wrong, and they make sure that you continue to believe what it is that you believe together. And all of us do this as well. Even inside of our country, there are certain things that we believe, that we hold to, and we think that that's because we're right. The rest of the world looks at us and says, I can't believe that you think that way. So, some of you think that about other countries, and you look at that country like, hey, how do they possibly believe that? But belief is actually really easy to maintain in a community of shared belief. One of the things that's interesting for me is that I actually spent a significant amount of time with a lot of different people groups in my life. And I lived as a farmer growing up. I've lived here in the metro New York area for a significant amount of time. Those two groups of people are very different, by the way. I also lived in Alabama for a significant amount of time. I lived in the Midwest for a significant amount of time, and now I've lived in the Northeast for a significant amount of time. And you know what I experienced with all of those groups of people? They all looked at each other and said, I don't understand them. And it was so interesting for me growing up in all those different spaces and interacting with all those groups of people. And sometimes I'll interact with those of you here in this space, and you'll talk to me about, I don't understand the Midwest, and I don't understand the South, and and I'm like, well, if you would actually go there and live there, it's interesting. You might not agree with them, but you would actually kind of see why it is that they believe what it is that they believe. But one of the things that all of us have experienced is that belief is easy to maintain inside of a community of shared belief. And I think that belief is one of the greatest gifts. It's one of God's greatest gifts to humankind, the ability to believe. But it can be good and it can be bad. And it can lead us down roads that are really helpful to the world around us, and it can also lead us down roads that can be really detrimental to the world around us. And it can lead us to truth, but it can also lead us in other directions. And you talk about communities of belief. I mean, all of us have experienced the stories of cults and how you look at it, you say, well, how can they believe that? But inside of that community, when you're surrounded by people who believe the same thing, well, it's very easy to believe the same thing. So then how does that impact religious belief? And here's the thing that's interesting. For many of us, we like to look at religious belief as different. I understand belief as how it works, just kind of out there in the world. But religious belief is different. It's powerful and it's unique. But the reality is this. Religious belief is just belief applied to religious things. The reality is that religious belief is just belief applied to things of a religious nature. It's still belief, and all of the rules still apply. And the reality of belief still applies. And some people say that seeing is believing, but the reality is, if you look at belief for what it actually is, well, believing is seeing. And if you believe something enough, you're going to see what it is that you want to see. And if you're surrounded by people who believe the same thing, and and are seeing the same thing, then it's really easy to maintain that belief. And the reality is the same thing applies to religion. And the truth is that when it comes to religion, if you believe deeply enough in any religious system, well, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it? Because if you believe something deeply enough, well, you're gonna look for a way until you find a way, and you're gonna look for evidence that supports what it is that you believe. And so you pray for something and it happens, and you say, well, look, prayer works. I told you, prayer works. But then you pray about something and it doesn't happen, and you say, well, you didn't have enough faith, or maybe you say, well, there must be sin in your life. Duh. I mean, if sin in my life means that my prayers aren't answered, I should just quit praying. I'm just going to tell you that right now. But you're going to look for what it is that supports your religious belief and what it is that you hold to. And if you're inside of a community, it's really easy to be able to maintain that and to constantly prop one another up inside of that. Which is why for some of you, you've come to the point where you've looked at religion and you've said, this is all one big Jedi mind trick. I mean, let's just be honest here. The reality is, it's just a community of belief. And you've decided you're going to believe something, you look for evidence of it. And you point one another to evidence of it. And if you look for a way long enough, you're going to find a way. But there's not really anything to it. It's just belief. And you can believe whatever it is that you want to believe. Eventually, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're going to make it happen, but it doesn't make it true. Now, some of you aren't very happy with me right now. Some of you are a little nervous right now. You're thinking to yourself, wait. You're supposed to help me believe, and I feel like you're helping me not believe. I don't know what it is that you're doing here. Some of you invited a friend today, and you're thinking, this was the wrong day. Why did I do this today? Some of you, as I said earlier, have thought through this before. Some of you haven't. Some of you have begun to think through it, and then you decided, I don't want to think about that anymore. Some of you are excited because you came with your friend, and you've been telling your friend this for years, and now I'm actually backing up what you've said, and your friend is really, really not happy that you came today. Some of you are actually relieved that finally we're being honest about it. And here's the thing. You're going to have to be honest about this. I remember actually when I first struggled through this, I think this question's always in the back of all of our minds, if you're going to be honest on a faith journey. But I remember sitting down with my friends, and I was in theology school at the time, and I remember sitting around a table, and I asked them, I said, what makes my belief different than that of a Muslim? I mean, they believe God answers their prayer. What makes my belief different than someone who's Hindu? What makes it different? Is it just the same? And the reality is, if you're honest about belief, you come to one of two places. And for many of you, this is where you've come to, and you've said, okay, well, I have to either, one, believe that this whole thing is just a Jedi mind trick and I'm done with it. It doesn't have any advantage, and you still come around occasionally because you want to appease your mom, or you still come around occasionally because, your grandmother wants you to be there, or there's, cute girls in church. Well, whatever it may be, you still come around occasionally, but the reality is that it's just another community of belief, whatever. Or maybe you've stepped into it and said, you know what, you just pick one. Just pick one, it doesn't really matter. It's a self-fulfilling thing, but it's good for you. And I don't know if you know this or not, but studies show that those who are religious actually live longer, they have better relationships, they're healthier, they're happier. And so you've decided, I'm just gonna buy into one of the mind tricks, it's good. It's actually good for me, it'll help me live longer. It'll help me enjoy life more. So just choose one. You just choose one and go with it. I remember wrestling through this, and it was hard. But at some point, you're going to have to be honest about this. And if we're going to build a faith that lasts, if we're going to build a faith that's honest, that has integrity, we have to confront the reality of belief and what it is. So why then am I a Christian? Here's why. Every faith tradition in the world starts with a believe that. It started with a group of people who believed something. Every religion has a set of believe that's. In other words, if you're going to be part of this is what we believe, and you have to believe that, and you have to believe that, and believe that, and believe that, and believe that, and believe that. And we all agree that we believe this. And every religion starts with a group of people who came together, and usually, for some reason that it benefited them, they'd come to, okay, this is what we believe. And there was a prophet at some point who said that they heard something from God where God said, okay, this is what you should believe. And so therefore, this is what we believe, and you need to believe that, and 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 believe that. But here's the thing. This is one of the things that makes Christianity completely different. I don't know if you've ever thought through this or not before, but here's the reality of it. The message of Jesus and the movement of Jesus did not begin with a group of people who believed something. This is really important. Really important. As a matter of fact, the movement of Jesus began with a group of people who didn't believe. A group of people who didn't believe. When Jesus died, listen to me. When Jesus died, those who were closest to him didn't believe. They believed that he was dead. And when Jesus died on that cross, they believed it was over. The movement of Jesus didn't begin with people who believed that he was the Messiah. As a matter of fact, when Jesus dies, every single one of his disciples stops believing. Every single one of them. They all ran for their life. And if you were to go to Peter and say, hey, Peter, who is Jesus? Well, you know what? I thought that he was the Messiah. I thought that he might do something special, but he's dead. And Peter was so afraid for his life that even when he's confronted by a middle school girl, he starts to swear that he'd never even heard of Jesus. He never met Jesus. He wanted nothing to do with Jesus. Why? Because he didn't believe. Why didn't he believe? Because he was dead. And if you were to talk to John, if you were to go to John and say, hey, John, who is Jesus? Well, Jesus was my brother, and he talked a big game, but the reality is, I always knew he wasn't who he says he was. Why? Because he's dead. Andrew, who is Jesus? I don't know who he was, but he's dead. The movement of Jesus didn't begin with a group of people who believed. It actually began with a group of people who didn't believe. And they didn't believe to the extent that they all went back to what it is that they did before. And so they all decided, I'm just going to go back to fishing. I don't believe it anymore. And they were terrified and they were cowards and they ran for their life. And not one of them, listen to me, not one of them came back later and said, you know what, I actually believed it the whole time. Not one of them writes to the church and says, you know what, the other 11, they didn't believe. But me, I knew it. I knew he was coming back. I actually believed. No, none of them believed. The entire movement started with a group of people who did not believe. But then a few weeks later, these individuals who ran for their life because they had given up on believing, stepped into the city of Jerusalem and began to share the message of Jesus. As a matter of fact, that same Peter who ran terrified by that middle school girl, that same Peter stood up in the middle of Jerusalem and proclaimed in front of all the religious leaders who had actually put Jesus to death, stood up and proclaimed the truth of who Jesus was. Now, let me ask you something. What changed? What changed? Did they begin to believe something? Did they find some new truth that, listen, you know what? We forgot that about what Jesus taught. Man, that teaching of Jesus was so powerful. I learned that new teaching of Jesus and Peter reminded me of it. So let's now go out and share this message. Did they start to believe something? No. Listen. What changed isn't that they believed something. What changed is that they saw something. They saw something. The movement of Jesus didn't begin with a group of people who believed something. It began with a group of people who saw something. And those individuals who were terrified, running for their life, all of a sudden became very bold and literally willing to give their life for it. Why? Because when you see someone come back from the dead, it changes everything. And they didn't believe it because they read something, and they didn't believe it because there was an ancient book. Listen, every religion has an ancient book. No, they believed it because they saw something. And once they saw him walk out of that tomb, everything changed. The movement of Jesus didn't begin with a bunch of believe that statements. It began with an event. And no one believed it until that event. But when someone can predict their death and resurrection and actually do it, you know what you do? You listen to what they say. And all of a sudden, Peter said, oh my goodness, he actually is who he said he was. And one of the really interesting things about Jesus and the teachings of Jesus is that it was impossible to believe in Jesus when he died. You know why? Because Jesus didn't come and say, hey, listen, the Father wants you to believe that and believe that and believe that and believe that and believe that. And if you'll just believe these things, you're going to be fine. As a matter of fact, that's not at all what Jesus did. Jesus stepped in and said, no, this is all about me. And if you want to find your way back to the Father, you have to follow me. And you have to know me. And it goes through me. So when me died, it was over. Until he walked out of that tomb. And they saw something, and it changed everything. The movement of Jesus didn't start with a group of people who believed that, a community of people who just encouraged one another to believe that. It didn't start years after some prophet who heard something. No, it started with an event. And those who didn't believe began to believe, not because they were told something, because they saw something. And when Paul walks into Rome 20 years later, not hundreds and hundreds of years later, not so far into the distance that you couldn't actually investigate whether or not it actually happened, that you couldn't go and talk to the witnesses, when he walked into Athens a couple of years later, he stands up in front of Athens and he says, let me take you back to this verse. Remember this from week 1. He stands up, Acts 17:32, and he says this, and he has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. What was the message over and over and over again? Hey, listen, here's the teachings of Jesus. You should really believe that. Here, let me walk you through the Sermon on the Mount. Let me talk to you about, it's interesting, when you look at the early messages as it pertains to them sharing the message of Jesus, they don't talk about Jesus' teachings at all. Peter doesn't talk about Jesus' teachings. Paul doesn't talk about Jesus' teaching. You know what they talk about? They talk about what it is that changed everything. And they don't say you should believe this because he was a really good teacher and he told us that we should believe this. And no. They say you should believe this because he walked out of that tomb. When you look at Peter's message, when he stands up in Jerusalem, and this is true for most of those early messages as they're sharing the message of Jesus and what it is that has happened. Peter stands up and he basically says this. He says, you killed him. And he's literally talking to the people who killed him. He's in Jerusalem. He's talking to the very same people who crucified him. You killed him. God raised him. We've seen him. Now say you're sorry. This is literally, if you look at Peter's message, this is literally his message. When you look at Stephen's message, this is literally his message. You killed him. All of us saw it. You killed him. God raised him. We've seen him. Not like 12 people have seen him. No, hundreds and hundreds of people have seen him. We've seen him. Now say you're sorry. Now, you can know that he is who he said he was. Why? What is it that makes the movement of Jesus different? It didn't start with a group of people who believed that. It actually started with a group of people who didn't. But God said, no. I'm going to give you proof. And so he's going to walk out of that tomb. This is incredibly important. Because if you're going to build a faith that lasts, you have to understand it's not all the same. And you have to understand what it is that our faith is built on. It's not built on an ancient book. Every religion has an ancient book. It's built on an event. Which is why I've said from the very beginning, the question you have to answer is this: who is Jesus? And what are you going to do with the fact that he walked out of that tomb? What are you going to do with that event? Not something that someone said, that event. Now, here's what I want to challenge you to do. As you walk into this week, and as you're talking at lunch, or as you go into your dinner groups, hopefully you're part of a dinner group and part of that community and having those conversations. It's so much more powerful than just being here on Sundays. But as you walk into your groups, I want for you to ask this question. Number one, did today's conversation make you uncomfortable? Some of you are like, yes, very uncomfortable. Why? And then number two, what is it that your faith is built on? What is it that your faith is built on? And what are you going to do with this question? Will you pray with me? Father, I pray that today as we walk through what for some of us is a little bit uncomfortable, for some of us is maybe we've thought about before, but we didn't want to think about. Father, I pray that we would be able to realize the truth that that as we walk through this, that rather than shying away from this question, that we would recognize the unbelievable thing that you did. That you didn't just step in and say, okay, I just want you to believe this. I just want you to, that you actually, as Paul said, that you walked in, that you stepped in and said, no, I'm going to give you proof. I want for you to know beyond a shadow of a doubt, I'm going to provide proof. And in that process, you took those who had stopped believing and brought them to faith. I thank you for that incredible gift. And I thank you that we as well can place our faith in Jesus because of what it is that you did on that Easter morning. In Jesus' name, amen.